today's convocation speaker, the Reverend Dr. Clyde Steckel. Now, Clyde asked me to keep the introduction brief, so you will have to bribe me later to hear stories about him. Clyde was called to the United faculty in 1970. He served as dean, then known as academic vice president, from 1979 to 1989, before stepping down to return to full-time teaching. Those of us who learned pastoral care and counseling from Clyde know him as a stellar teacher and mentor, and a man who uses humor to good effect. Prior to coming to United, Clyde served as a parish minister, a hospital chaplain, and a campus minister. After his alleged retirement, he continued to teach here as senior professor and then as adjunct professor. He served at various times as interim conference minister, interim senior minister, and he recently wrote a provocative and timely book, New Ecclesiology and Polity, the United Church of Christ. Clyde is married to Eleanor, who was an important source of support for women students in the early 1970s. We hardly need to welcome Clyde to UTS, but let's greet him with appreciation for all he has given to this school.
Thank you all very much. What were they thinking then? What would they think now? I ask these questions of the founders of United Seminary, one of whom, who is here today. I wish to recognize one of the founding staff members of United, Alice Strobel. Alice, would you stand? Alice represents the Yankton tradition that is a part of the founding of this school. I will count on her to correct whatever misinterpretations I may give of that tradition in my remarks. As we embark on a year of celebrating the 50th anniversary of the creation of United, it seems good to ask what they had in mind and whether that's what they would see now. The answers don't totally depend on my own imagination. The founders left correspondence, speeches, secretarial minutes from boards and committees, and there are the published histories by Jean Jayberg and Art Merrill. These tell us something of what they had in mind, but what they would think now is mostly my own imagining. 50 years ago, the founders were thinking that the United Church of Christ would become a new kind of denomination, one loyal to its many historic traditions, but also a new kind of denomination, creating a better form of governance and achieving wider Christian unity. Whether the United Church of Christ fulfilled those expectations is a question for another time and place. My short answer is almost, but not quite. 50 years ago, the founders of United Seminary were thinking that it could be a new kind of seminary as well. Minneapolis St. Paul needed, they thought, a theological school that was not Lutheran, Catholic, or evangelical. Denominational leaders, especially United Methodists, Presbyterians, Episcopalians, Disciples, and American Baptists, supported United's vision and welcomed it warmly. It would be a truly ecumenical seminary. This ecumenical reality showed up increasingly in student enrollments, new faculty appointments, board members, and major donors, but not with denominational money. Not then, not ever. As the numbers of ecumenical students increased, however, supporting denominations increasingly scrutinized the education their students were receiving at this school. It was not only churlish grumbling about United being too feminist, too gay, not enough language study, wrong theologians, too practical or too academic. All those were said. Specifically, it was denominational offices insisting that their courses cover required topics with bibliographies that they expected. I remember one letter I received when I was dean from a denominational office. The office had examined the United courses in the history and governance of that denomination and warned me that their approval would be withdrawn if we did not add those required texts and topics. When I read that letter, I shrieked, "Holy academic freedom!" Marion Heft, who was then the dean secretary, came into the office because she was not used to me shrieking. If I were a more mature person, I would have forgiven and forgotten all that. But as you can see, I have not. The question of how United is an ecumenical school now has shifted ground since then. With the increasing religious diversification of America, reflected in the student body here, ecumenical can no longer mean the Protestant Christian ecumenism of mid-century conciliarism, or even the transformed Christian ecumenism with the addition of Roman Catholic and Orthodox traditions. How do we ecumenically account for Unitarian Universalists in an ostensibly Christian community, or Jews, or Muslims, Wiccans, Buddhists, Hindus, or others? I'm not sure how the founders would answer. I would hope they would say, "Welcome. This is a good place to get to know one another. This is a good place to seek common ground." 50 years ago, the founders thought that United would be a residential campus and community. The architect's original campus model used to be in the library court under plexiglass. I'm sure it's in storage somewhere. Showed a number of new student apartment buildings, additional faculty homes, and a pond with a retreat center in the woods to the north. The woods have since been replaced. Well, some of the trees are still there. Students and faculty in this vision would live together, study together, share meals together, worship together, and socialize informally in faculty homes. Parking lots then were small and scattered. Commuting might be necessary for a few student pastors, but not foreseen as desirable or even possible for most students or faculty. Founders should have looked more closely at the University of Minnesota campuses, where parking lots and parking ramps are the chief architectural features. Well, this founding vision did not last long. Raising capital funds for campus expansion seemed impossible when the operating budget was always at risk. An increasingly older student body commuted from their homes in the suburbs and the cities and distant places. Finally, though, it was the necessity of selling the woods and then the faculty homes simply to keep going that doomed the idea of a residential campus. No doubt something was lost, but the school was saved. 50 years ago, the founders thought that the new United Church of Christ would financially support its theological schools generously, as indeed had been the case in the former Evangelical and Reformed Church. 3 successive General Synod committees worked on the question of how the new denomination would relate to its theological schools. Before I joined the faculty here, while I was still a campus minister, I was a member of the second of those 3 committees. At one of its meetings, seminary presidents and deans were invited. And I remember that I happened to fly to that meeting in New York, seated between Dean Louis Gunneman, who was in the window seat because he was short, and President Reuben Hieneman, who was in the aisle seat because he was tall. All during that flight, they talked around me or through me about how to reverse the Synod's 1961 decision to phase out direct financial aid to seminaries. Talk about a boundary situation. I thought I should go to the bathroom, hang out for a while until they finished their plotting. I should have told them, gentlemen, it's not going to happen. And it did not, alas. 50 years ago, the founders hoped to create a new kind of curriculum. The theological tradition of Mission House was something I would call neo-orthodoxy light. And the Yankton heritage was something I would call lay Lutheran pietism. Congregational only because they wanted no bishops or synods over them. Thank you. By neo-orthodoxy light, I mean a biblical and Christologically centered theology which strongly affirmed the church, the actual church. Robust European neo-orthodoxy was just as hard on the church as it was on culture. But our Mission House founding faculty members and the Yankton faculty members loved the church and believed in the church, in the actual church. This tradition of belief in the church opened the door to a kind of creeping Catholicism that goes hand in hand, I think, with Calvinism, and ecumenism that we did come to embrace and still do. The new curriculum of 1967 was designed on the foundation of Paul Tillich's theological method of correlation, questions of culture in dialogue with the answers of theological traditions. Though Tillich may be largely forgotten nowadays, certainly not in theology and the arts, the dialogical method continues as foundational in the United curriculum, with many new elements, the Niebuhrs, process thought, liberation theologies, to name a few. Is that what the founders wanted? Neo-orthodoxy might be uncomfortable with that mix. But if you love the church, if you really love the church, you must also love the world. For the church is very much in and of the world. Integration was also a key core value in that new curriculum. Integration of the theological disciplines, theory and practice, aspects of the self, professional, pastoral, emotional, physical, intellectual. Integration was unambiguously good. Today, in postmodernity, integration can be worrisome. Who is to do the integrating? And who are those who are to be integrated, whether they want to be or not? I conclude by asking what the founders would think of United if they came back today. Let's imagine they've just been away. They haven't been asleep. They've been alive and alert and moving with the culture. Let's imagine they have been away and come back. What would they think? First, I think the founders would be surprised at both the small size of the campus and its strange, new, postmodern beauty. Here they would see a restored prairie fronting an international-style set of buildings. These were not meant for the prairies, these buildings. International style, as you know, is austere, rectangular, minimally colored, and undecorated. With the original classroom building, and now they would see a chapel with a harmoniously rectangular white stone and glass box, but an explosion of curved golden forms on the inside. Pure postmodernity. The founders would also love all of the art on display in the buildings because the international style is so barren and so austere. So they would welcome the warmth and the beauty of the art. The founders would be struck, I think, by the addition of spiritual formation to the curriculum. They would be struck by the vigorous theology and arts program, the increasing number of scholarly publications by members of the faculty held in high esteem, along with the high quality and diversity of the students. I was once asked when I retired as dean how to compare present students with former students. I'm not going to do that today. That did not work. The founders might wonder whether the emphasis on context, a cafe named Context, and contextuality really means, and whether that emphasis on contextuality implies an ultimately religious and moral relativism, and if the answer is no, how does one draw that line? They would worry about the smaller number of teaching positions, the small number of UCC presidents across the years, and the unending budgetary worries. Most of all, I think the founders would be immensely proud that United has been in the forefront of schools challenging racism and sexism, opening doors for persons of LGBT orientation, persons with disabilities, Native Americans, older second career students, and persons in recovery from chemical dependency. The founders would recognize the profound institutional costs of such prophetic witness in a society now moving to the far right, politically and religiously. But I think still they would encourage us to stay the course, one they could not have foreseen in detail, but a faithful path for the followers of Jesus Christ. Thank you.